Okay, everyone, we are recording. Welcome back to our weekly webinar. The goal is to continue to provide as much value as we possibly can. I joked that last week, about halfway through the webinar, several people said, this is your best webinar because you're talking less and we want to hear from more people in the community. So I take no offense, though I was slightly offended. Just joking, not really. But what I want to do is continue to offer insights, not just from our experience, but also from what many of you are enduring and going through, both good and bad. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded. We'll send out the replay in a couple of days or earlier, along with every resource we mentioned. So for example, if Andy mentions his website today, I will send that out. If we talk about Scott's website, if whatever we discuss, we'll put that in the resource tab when we send it out. As a reminder, any questions, please add them to chat or raise your hand, and we will call on you. And Scott, Kent, Matt, others on our team are here to help you. As I encourage everyone to do, we'd love for you to spend a few minutes every week on the blog at Prison Professors. Michael's going to be hitting the road here soon for a many prisons tour, going to be all over the country speaking, training staff and prisoners. And he's going to be reporting on what he's learning through the blog. For example, what a surprise, he put up another blog. Developing a release plan before going to prison. Our team would encourage you to review this, to learn from it, and to watch the prior webinars we've covered on this subject. It will absolutely guide you or help guide you throughout this process. Like we did last week, I want to open up by sharing a couple of, I don't want to say horror stories, but things that people could have done differently as they approach this process. And to the point of people messaging me that they want others to get engaged, I'd be very grateful right now if you have yet to be sentenced and you would be willing to engage with us. For example, Dr. Andy or someone, if you'd be willing to offer some insights as we go through this little exercise, because while we focus primarily on post-sentencing, there are some people we have learned who are joining us in the pre-sentencing stage. And there are those who want to know they're doing all they can to prepare. So if you get to be sentenced and you're willing to engage, please join us. So let me start with something that was very frustrating for a defendant. And it ties to all of us, regardless of where you are in the journey. I received a call from a defendant who said he cooperated extensively, paid back a lot of the money, yet at his sentencing hearing, the judge gave him a higher sentence than the government had recommended. The government recommended a significant downward departure, and the judge wasn't willing to go as low, in part because the judge said something we've heard before, which is, you cooperated, but it was primarily, I feel, to keep you out of prison. That level of remorse and acceptance isn't there. So too many people defer to this belief that if they're cooperating or they pay back the money, that they don't need to properly prepare for the probation report, or they don't need to do that self-advocacy and first-person narrative to the probation officer. So I want all of you, whether you're cooperating or not, or you paid back the money or not, to recognize that judges are cynical. And if you learned one thing from our work, it's kind of like when I take a golf lesson, the coach said, if there's one thing you take from this hour today, let it be this. If there's one thing you take from the hour that you're giving our team on a Thursday, because we know you're all busy, we want it to be this. Position yourself in the position of the stakeholders. Every decision that you make, a judge is cynical. And to hear a judge tell a defendant who wore wires, he wore wires, he testified at trial under great stress, stuff right out of movies, to not give the defendant the credit that he should because he then said you did it because you don't want to go to prison is consistent with what we've heard. So we need you to be advocating and demonstrating why you're worthy of leniency, not because you cooperated, but because you're earning it. And this family is devastated. And they look back and they can't change the fact that he didn't prepare for the PSR. He didn't get his narrative to the probation officer. He didn't have an effective allocution statement. He presumed he's going to get probation. We don't want you to presume anything. And we can't change the past as much as we would like. So that's one story that I heard. A second story is I got kind of a mean message from a wife who apparently sent the transcript of an interview we did with John Gustin. John Gustin, as you know, was the retired halfway house director for 20 years for the BOP. He's been on 3 webinars. Apparently, someone who watched the webinar we did with him had it transcribed or took it from the prison professor's website and sent it to her husband. The husband then came home from prison. We've never spoke with him, didn't join the webinar, but she watched the webinar and she said, essentially, what's wrong with you people? Guston said, my husband could work from home. And apparently, this person went to the halfway house. He was one of the last people released under CARES. As many of you likely know, the CARES Act is ending, I believe, in May. So he was fortunate to get released early under CARES, about 8 months. And this wife said, what's wrong with you people? John Guston said my husband could work from home. And after further review, of course, we learned while her husband was released early due to his health issues, he spent a little time in the halfway house, now in home confinement. Can anyone guess what his probation officer wants him to do while he's on home confinement? Scott, Matt, can someone engage? Matt, you're on home. Can someone walk you through what the probation officer is probably telling him to do?
Yeah, I mean, quite clearly it's go get a job on the outside, something that is sort of pre-cleared with the halfway house and the employment office there. It's not necessarily a shoo-in that you can work from home. I think what Mr. Guston was referencing is that if you have a plan laid out, if you clearly articulate that to the stakeholders, that then potentially you could work from home. It's not granted.
So that's correct. If you were to listen to the interview, and it's very easy to pull 3 sentences from the interview that says, yes, it is possible to work from home. He did not say it's an absolute. And when I learned what this person did while in custody, it was not what Mr. Carper's son Scott is doing by documenting the journey and building a release plan. It's not what Andy is doing before sentencing. It's not what you did, Matt, in prison by contributing to a website. It's not building a release plan. So to say that the probation officer laughed at him would be an understatement to laughing at someone. So to presume that you're going to release from prison when you owe potential restitution and presume that you're going to work from home as an entrepreneur without any record behind it is like believing Philip Morris doesn't really want you to smoke cigarettes despite their public policy statements. It's insane. And now this prisoner who's home is saying the same thing that a lot of people say. It's my case manager's fault. And it was just COVID and the programs there weren't that great. And I just wanted to get home. I didn't know that it was important, but now I want to go back and we can't change it. So we can't guarantee that your probation officer will approve you working from home. We can't do that. What we do know is if you don't try and create a plan, you have zero chance. And I suspect eventually Mr. Carper's son will be on our webinar and express higher levels of liberty that he's had because of the work that he's doing. Ryan contributed to our webinar last week and discussed at length the higher levels of liberty he's experienced because of the work that he created. So if we were in your shoes, we would be documenting it at every stage of the journey. Now, one more issue on the pre-sentencing as it comes to self-advocacy. We did have someone who is cooperating, who's getting ready to go for a proffer agreement. And he got very creative and watched the interview with Chris Maloney, the former chief of probation, who suggested sharing work with government stakeholders. So this person went to his proffer with his narrative, signed it in front of the prosecutor, handed it to them. He gave the prosecutor a Google sheet, a link to a Google sheet that showed that while he's been unable to get employed, he has submitted more than 50 applications for work. And he basically told the prosecutor, I just want you to know that I'm not sitting around all day. I'm trying to look for work. This is relevant, of course, because I've been to sentencing hearings where, like Judge Carter very famously said to a defendant, a private equity guy. So he said, Mr. Johnson, if you don't mind my asking, what do you do all day? It was like, and the whole courtroom went quiet. And the defendant was like, nada, nothing. And it didn't go great. So if you can't work, document that you're looking for work. And I know people on this webinar aren't working, but I also know they're documenting that they're looking for work. And as we have said, if you're not in prison yet, many of you feel like you are already in prison. You're not getting credit for it right now. So the goal of delaying a sentencing hearing or preparing for sentencing is to feel as if the work you are doing now would lead to a shorter sentence. And I think Ron articulated that last week. Ron, can you give us like the 60-minute shtick of how you prepared and how that helped helped you? You didn't sit around all day watching South Park. And what did you do? Give us a minute or two. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I worked pretty much nonstop, as we discussed, focused on everything I could find on the website. My allocution statement was important. I continued with the work that I did, the volunteer work with prison professors that I did through white collar advice. I prepared every day. I spent every day working and focusing on, as you guys say all the time, the end result. And I can't even tell you how valuable that was when I went in front of the judge, because I was prepared. I knew what to expect. He saw that. I was confident, but yet I was humble, took responsibility. And he mentioned all the work that I had done and put before them, from the volunteer work to my personal narrative. It's invaluable. That work is invaluable.
So thank you, Ron. So regardless of where you are in the process, you've got to self-advocate. We can continue with horror stories, including, unfortunately, someone who is in our community who was told in the probation interview to not disclose to the degree that he wanted any issue of substance abuse. And this person's now in prison. And despite a recommendation from the judge and treatment, there are some issues getting into the drug program because of the lack of disclosure. It's hard to undo that. Someone in our community, a white-collar executive in the state where he was arrested, you're allowed to hold a gun. You're allowed to carry a gun. And that gun was referenced in the probation report, even though it wasn't part of his crime. But some states in Texas, apparently Scott Brown can tell us, people walk around with guns on their hips. Kind of foreign here in California, but it happens. The lawyer did not remove or ask the probation officer to remove this reference of a gun. So the person's in prison, and the drug coordinator said, yeah, you're eligible. You disclose it. There's a reference to a gun in your PSR. You can do this and get the earned time credits, and you cannot get the year off. This is simply because he wasn't prepared for the probation report. So if you have yet to sit for the probation report, our team created a very comprehensive course that, if you have interest in it, reach out. It's about 2 hours worth of content that you can go through, but you've got to be your best advocate. We do not want you to call and say your PSR interview was 10 minutes, because we cannot undo that down the road. Before we get into other people in our community speaking, I do want to call on Frank. Frank, are you here? I see you. Frank has been on, unmute yourself, Frank. Sometimes we get bad news and we don't get what we want. And Frank got some bad news this week, and I want him to mention it, and I want him to address how he's responding to it. So Frank, welcome. Tell us what happened and how you're dealing with it.
Well, you know, at first it appears on the surface to be bad news. I live in California, Northern California, just north of San Francisco, and that normally the Bureau of Prisons would assign you to a facility that would be within 500 miles of your home. And Justin, we actually went back and examined, you know, the sentencing memorandum, and we did in fact put something in there that it would be ideal for Mr. Glassner to be incarcerated somewhere close to his home in Northern California. Mm-hmm. All well and good. And that we also know from all our participation in our seminars that we have no control over that. You know, you don't know where you're going to be assigned. And then this week, I got a note from my attorney that I had been designated, right use of words now, Justin, and that where I got designated was 3,000 miles away from my home. And that was to, you know, North Carolina. And that, what's the proper pronunciation?
Butner, the Butner Federal Prison.
Okay. I had the lowest level of security, minimum security, and I was assigned to the Butner Federal Prison Camp. And then, you know, immediately you look at it going, oh my God, this is 3,000 miles away from my home. My family's not going to be able to visit me except for maybe my wife, who ironically is a flight attendant, 27-year flight attendant with United. And then First Pass says, you know, your stomach sinks and says, this is probably the worst thing that could have ever happened. And then from all of my participation with my family here, my my merry band of people, I said, how do we take all of this stuff that might be deemed as negative and turn it into a positive? Okay, so originally we thought that Atwater, near Merced, might be a good assignment. It has a very small camp on, the facilities of the Atwater High Security Prison. So you're in a camp, looking at gun towers, but it's still better than nothing. And then, when I went back in and I thought for a second, going, what could be the best of what could be deemed a negative situation? Okay. And then we saw that there are all sorts of facilities, including what might be considered, I think, probably one of the best medical facilities in the Bureau of Prisons. If you have health issues, and I've got a couple, and then, there are other facilities there, which then mean, well, perhaps there's other programs that participate or cross-participate. We don't know. But instead of panicking and instead of saying, oh my God, this is the worst thing that could ever happen, I was immediately in communication with Justin, and then subsequently Michael came on and said, this may not be the best thing that you look at on its face, but depending on what we pick out of it, because we haven't had a chance to really let this story unwind yet, but my first reaction was, how do we take all this and make the best situation out of what might be deemed something that's bad? And honestly, if you pan through, and also, Justin, what went through my head was, if you're mining for gold, you have to go through 400 tons of ore to find 1 ounce of gold. So where do we find all the good things in there? It might be, turns out to be, except for the 3,000 miles, might be one of the best assignments that could be had. And let's look for the good stuff. Let's go through everything that could be done. Let's do everything we possibly can do to make our stay as short as possible. And in all cases, let's take every single thing that we've learned or could learn and make use of it, and then take our experience and then share it with our community and pay it forward, at least like I know I have in my heart, and then share with the community. So what do you do when something like this happens, and how, in fact, do we make the best out of all of this?
Frank, that's very well said. Thank you. And of course, everything that Frank experienced, he'll build into his release plan, because there are some people, when they surrender to prison, in a couple of minutes, I'll go over to Matt, because I want to talk a little bit about his structure and advocacy while in prison. But there are some people who'd immediately run to their case manager and complain that they were sent to a prison 3,000 miles from home, and just go from bad to worse. So instead, and Michael mentioned this on our call, Frank, perhaps it works in Frank's interest that he's in a prison so far from home, because they may consider releasing him earlier, because he may need more time in the community, less connection with his family, because it's not easy to get there, even if his wife is a flight attendant. I know Mr. Carper's son dealt with that same news. Scott lived in California, and they shipped him all the way to Leavenworth in Kansas, and you make the most of it. So while the judge may recommend a prison, it is ultimately up to the Bureau of Prisons. And we continue to get this news, unfortunately. I think it still has a lot to do with COVID, security levels. BOP population is actually higher than when COVID started, which is somewhat concerning. But someone new to our community lives in Las Vegas, and she was just designated to a federal prison camp in Pekin, Illinois, ironically, where Michael Santos just spoke. So we, in some cases, can work on a redesignation. Doesn't mean we'll be successful. In Frank's case, he said, I'm going to accept Butner. I'm going to go there for my year and a day. I'm going to mitigate, create my release plan, and come home. Others may say, I want to try to pivot and work on a redesignation with the BOP. We can try. Don't know if we'll be successful. So Frank, thank you for your upbeat attitude. And again, I hate to sound cynical, but there are people who work in the government who have said to us, kind of politely and sometimes not politely, we do not believe anything that comes out of your mouth. And I'm sorry, but you're a criminal, you're in prison, you are telling a case manager or a judge exactly what we want to hear. If there isn't evidence behind it, if there isn't a plan behind it, you're just not going to be successful. And I mentioned that earlier, when the guy cooperated extensively and didn't get the sentence he wanted. Then we had someone go into proffer and share the narrative in a link to a Google sheet that showed exactly where he's applying for work. I mean, who does that? Do you think that influenced the U.S. attorney? Probably. I think so. Why is that relevant? Because Judge Boulware at a sentencing conference said to every lawyer in the room, hey, all lawyers, I want you to know, I know your clients aren't going to the penitentiary. I filmed a YouTube video about this. I know your people aren't going to the penitentiary. Even a low security prison ain't Shawshank Redemption. I've toured these minimum security camps. I think they're club feds. But what you lawyers can do is articulate all of the collateral consequences that accompany your client's conduct, besides just the prison term. Are they fired? Do they lose their license? Are they unhireable? Those are things I need to know as a sentencing judge because they factor into my sentence. Don't presume it's just prison. That comes directly from a federal judge appointed by Obama. He's in Nevada. Document it, show it. If not, some of them may think, I don't believe a damn word that you're saying, and I'm sorry, but if you put yourself in the shoes of the stakeholders, with whom do they identify? Your victims. When you go to prison and say, I'm eligible for this, I'm eligible for that, does that magically mean they're going to release you? You know what a case manager whom they identify with? Your sentencing judge who gave you the sentence, and your victims, if you've created them. They're thinking, I'm not going to let you out early, potentially, unless you're worthy of it and you're documenting it. That is exactly what I want all of you to do. Someone said, can you say that quote again from the judge? When I send out the replay, I'll put a link to the video I filmed from the actual conference where the judge said, lawyers, I know your clients aren't going to the penitentiary. This is mitigation. This is self-advocacy. We are of the opinion, regardless of where you are in this mitigation arc, only you can do it. Whether you choose to do it, that's up to you, right? There are still people till this day who will say, someone advised me differently, despite a federal judge who has sentenced more than 4,000 defendants saying doing it this way. They'll say, no, I'm going to do it this way. My lawyer said to do it this way. My cousin or my nephew who served 3 days in the BOP said to do it this way. That's your choice. We want you to accept responsibility for everything you do. You can follow Ron's path and Frank's path, or you can go down the path of, I'm going to watch and not act. With that said, I do want to
you asked me also, and I think it's important to say, well, Frank, do you want to try for redesignation? And I thought to myself immediately, why would I want that piece of paper in what is a pristine, clean file at this point? The only thing that I want in my file are all the good things that I did, all the positive things that I did. And if I get off started on the first step of a journey is many, many steps. But if the first step is, oh, I need to get redesignated, a complaint is like, why would anyone in their right mind want to do that? So the 3,000 miles is a lot better than that one piece of paper, number one. And number two, how do I just keep on making the best of the worst? And then thirdly, like you say, the judge may look at it, and my particular judge is very, very well thought of, compassionate to the degree that he can be. And eventually someone's going to look at that where it said, well, we should have done something 500 miles away. We did something 3,000 miles away. We've got a model prisoner, hopefully. And again, we're part of a community, and that we all get together. And honestly, people say what they say on the outside, but what counts is, I think, what we say as a community and say together as justice impacted people. And us is what counts. Not so much what everybody else says, but what we do counts. What we do for ourselves count. And that's the direction I'm going in. I don't ask all you guys to go in that direction, but that's the direction I'm going in.
Well, it's the right direction, and we're grateful for you sharing that with us. And what I want to do now, many of you are getting ready to go to prison. I know many people on this webinar have surrender dates. I know of 6 or 7 of you that are going in within the next 7 or 8 days. And what I'd love to do is rely on Matt, who's new to our team. Matt, I know you're recently released from Lewisburg. Can you give us a quick summary, just real quick, of the length of your sentence, how long you served? And then I want to transition into those early days in prison, your process for getting into RDAP in that interview, along with a little bit of your structure in prison, because it really hurts our team. It's painful when someone comes home and they say prison was boring and every day felt like a year. And I just watched a lot of TV. And now they're on the other side with a whole new set of anxieties as a result of their terrible prison adjustment. And it kind of just a continuation of struggle. So give us a quick summary, Matt, and I want to talk a little bit about those early days in prison because people in our community are going in very soon.
Yeah, no problem. Once again, Matt O'Callahan, and I was sentenced to 51 months for wire fraud. I was designated, luckily, to a prison that was not too far from me, a camp, Lewisburg. It's about 3 hours from where I live. When I got there, it was, late June. It was very warm. I had every intention of, getting into RDAP. And what I mean by that is, I had a decent understanding of the program prior to going. As soon as I landed on the compound, I was trying to figure out, when the next class would start, things of that nature, making inroads. Because there was a number of reasons. One, I wanted to go through that program. I feel like I personally could glean a lot from it. And then secondly, for those of you who will be going into prison soon, I think you'll see firsthand that the RDAP living situation and the general camp living situation are really quite different. And if you want to speak to that, more specifically, I'm happy to talk to you.
I'd love that. I'd love for you to offer some, because some people are going through RDAP, some are not. I'd love for you to speak.
No problem. So, yeah. So, listen, coming from, I've always been blessed to have a nice, tidy house. Growing up, my parents took pride in a clean home, and it's something I've taken for granted. When you get shoved off to prison, the living conditions can vary, but they're not wonderful, right? With that being said, the RDAP, I'm speaking for Lewisburg, but I'm pretty sure this runs throughout the country and all the RDAP programs. There's a basis on respect. There's a basis on community living, and how that, how your actions can, interfere with someone else's day. So there's a sort of courtesy that's built in. With that, the living conditions are a lot cleaner. They're a lot less noisy, which was very big for me. I was really appreciative of that. And the structure of RDAP lends itself to having a productive stay away from your home, away from your family. There's set hours that you need to wake up every day. There's certain things that you need to do every day in order to live in that community. And what I found, even from when I started there to when I finished, there were more gentlemen coming in that weren't getting the benefit of the time off from RDAP, but were coming in and being active participants in that community because A, they wanted to live there, B, they wanted the structure, and C, and potentially as an ancillary benefit, they were hoping that maybe they would potentially get more halfway house, things of that nature. That said, when I was leaving and I had a sort of quasi exit interview, because I became pretty friendly with, or not friendly, I had a decent relationship with the people that ran the RDAP program, and then the people that facilitated it. And they said, in hindsight, are you glad you did this? And I was very glad I did it for multiple reasons, but also they said, would you have done it again if you weren't granted the time off? And with a clear throat and a whole heart, I said, absolutely. And for that reason, because living there for me was a lot better than living in the general camp. I'm not saying the general camp was unsafe or anything of that nature, but the RDAP was more conducive to a healthy environment and more productive.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because I know, I filmed a video this week that I'll send out on Saturday where I joked in the video. I said a number of clients, forgive me for sounding crude, that they'll go to prison and they'll say, man, I miss this iPhone more than sex. Okay, a number of people have said that we're just addicted to these things, right? So when you talk about the difference between the camp and RDAP, are you not seeing iPhones over in RDAP, but you're going to see a lot more disciplinary infractions taking place in the camp? Help us understand the rule breaking and the consequences in RDAP versus what you saw, because I know you also spent time in the general camp as well before you got into RDAP.
Right.
So help us understand that for those who are going to be in and out of RDAP.
Absolutely. So what you'll see, there is a fundamental difference in behaviors as well as, structure between the general camp and the RDAP camp. You had alluded to cell phones or vaping, e-cigarettes, other things, I'll be blunt, alcohol and drugs, they are available to you in that general camp. And the people that are in RDAP, pardon me, they are really incentivized not. Did I see cell phones in RDAP? Yes, absolutely. Did I see a e-vape from here? Now and again, yes, I saw these things. But you really you're dissuaded from taking part in that because it's a community event. So if one man gets caught with an iPhone, if one man gets caught with e-cigarette, the whole program has potential to suffer. They can be held back. They can stop the program for a month. That happened while I was there. Luckily, it didn't affect me. I'd already graduated. But there was people that I was very close with that got held back 2.5, 3 months because of bad behavior of the group. They didn't do it per se themselves. So in short order, there's a higher standard in the RDAP for rule breaking, where it's not as permissible. And we're not talking about getting in trouble by the people that run it. You're talking about getting hollered at by the guy who's sleeping next to you, the guy who's sitting next to you in the TV room, or walking to chow. I've seen some heated exchanges where other guys are telling another man to stop misbehaving.
So some of the consequences, for example, if one person's caught in RDAP, you mentioned they may hold back the class for a few months. And then what happens to that prisoner inmate? Is he begin to get ostracized? Well, what follows for someone who kind of ruins it for everyone who's trying to be productive and advance their release date?
It really, ostracized is the perfect word. And that's Justin, that's if it's not taken care of by the administration, where, men they get kicked out all the time. They get kicked out of RDAP, sent back to the general camp. They lose their potential for the good, for the time off, as well as it could affect your FSA, because it could be deemed for declining treatment. There's another leg to this. If you're acting really poorly, if you have an iPhone, if you have something like that, you get caught with it. Not only can you get kicked out of RDAP, lose that time, lose your potential FSA, lose some good time. I've heard you reference it before. You could pick up a new charge. So
yeah.
It's really like a 4-legged animal that can kick you in the face for doing something that's very short-sighted.
But before we go to Ryan, there's 2 people on this webinar who will be doing RDAP they asked me offline. They were told by someone who served time in the BOP a while back that they were advised not to do RDAP because of this idea of pull-ups and this kind of snitches idea that you need to tattletale on other people. And they were said it could be frowned upon by staff and others. And despite looking at a year off their sentence and really benefiting from the program that you say was terrific for you, they were advised not to do it. What is a pull-up, and how would you respond to someone who was told that?
Yeah, no problem. That's actually it's a common misconception. It's a common thing that you will hear. Just to go back a step, when I first got to Lewisburg, as you referenced, I was in the general camp. I made it clear to multiple people that my intention was to get over to RDAP as soon as possible. And I can't explain how many men tried to tell me that was a mistake. And, it's not the right place. It's for snitches. It's, they're going to tell you how to live. And so it is a common theory out there. Now, there was a couple of guys that, had that initial thought as well. But then once they got over to the program, they understood that that's not the case. It's not about snitching. It's just bad information. So going back to what you said, a pull-up, right? So the whole community relies on, the whole underbelly of it, or the backbone, is keeping everyone, everyone owes everyone else an explanation or responsibility to behave properly. So a pull-up might be, just if you and I are neighbors and, I think that you're not being respectful to the community because you're not picking up your trash or cleaning up your bunk. I will I will basically say that to you in front of the community, be like, hey, Justin, we don't think, I don't think you're holding up your end. You're not keeping your bunk clean, and, it's affecting me in this way. And it's really simple as that. So it's basically putting people on notice for something that might be a shortcoming. And it doesn't have to be as drastic as,
Yeah. Yes, it doesn't have to be. John, I noticed you had 3 iPhones over there. That's very true. I mean,
no, right.
And I know Scott and I have discussed this. Scott went through RDAP at Yankton. We want you to, we want you to use your judgment. We want you to listen to what we're striving, what we're teaching. Listen what we've learned from subject matter experts. Use your judgment as you determine what to do. Just because someone tells you to do something doesn't mean you should do it. Just because it's online doesn't mean that it's true. And for example, Michael and I discussed this with Frank a couple of days ago. There will be people in prison who say, this is the worst prison ever. They've been to one prison. I served time in a prison that was pretty good, but I didn't have anything else to compare it to. It was fine. There are guys say, this is the worst ever. Then they go to another prison and suddenly that's the worst one ever. Every place is the worst ever. Okay. We want you to use your own judgment, and we want you to be productive and not feel as if the time is a waste, or it truly can feel like a waste. And I think Matt, 51 months, home in 18 months or so, recalibrating, rebuilding. Matt, as I understand, you were also the RDAP leader. Like, so you were the...
Yeah, so I was, not to brag, but I'll brag so 51-month sentence. I left Lewisburg in 16 months. I spent 2 months in a halfway house. Now I'm home on home confinement, thanks to the CARES Act. For lack of a better term, I was valedictorian for the RDAP at Lewisburg. And, I took the program seriously. I think I helped a lot of guys through it. And for me, I took a lot out of it.
And before I turn it over to Ryan, who contributed last week, I'll mention that Matt, in his release plan, documented what he did in prison prior to his sentencing, did some work with the Prison Professors nonprofit by way of a course, right, on real estate and investing. You build that into the release plan. You can share that work with a stakeholder. It's not made up like I did it. You can show them this is an asset. Then it's likelier that when Matt's on home confinement right now, he's approved to do work with our team. That wasn't by accident. Let's come back to how I opened, where someone sent me a very mean text message that said, what's wrong with you people? Gustin said my husband could work from home. Matt can. It's by virtue of the work he did starting 2+ years ago. This other executive can't because he thought it would be fun to watch the Kardashians all day in prison. And now he wants to go back to prison because he doesn't want to go to the donut shop. So what you do now matters. The record you build now matters. Put yourself in the shoes of the position of the stakeholders 24 hours a day. If you're not doing that, you're not ready for sentencing, for prison, for halfway house, home confinement, or probation. That much I can tell you. Next, I want to go to Ryan, who last week was awesome. Ryan is still in the halfway house. Ryan, you were in a different camp in Illinois. Can you walk us through the structure of your day? Because we have myriad people getting ready to surrender to prison. And despite webinars being productive, our top 10 list, reentry plan, book list, looking for work and whatnot, people are still like, what am I going to do all day? I'm afraid that I'm going to be bored out of my mind. Can you give us an example of your day, Ryan, in prison?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, for everybody's day, it kind of varies a little bit. You got to find what works best for you. But I will say, for me, for my success that there, and for seeing other people's success, is really finding your own routine. And I followed pretty much a strict routine every day. I mean, I knew exactly what I was going to be doing every hour of the day. I would get up in the morning and I would make my coffee and my oatmeal. And I would chat with my buddy Mike while I ate that for about 5-10 minutes. And then I would go to journaling, and I would journal and I would write about my experience. And I'd write about anything that was going on that was important, especially if I had any interactions with staff as well. I made sure to make a note of that. I would transition over to email, and I would email my wife and kids every day. I wanted my kids to wake up to an email from me every morning when they got up before they went to school. And I wanted to maintain the relationship with my wife. And I felt that that was just key. After that, I would transfer over to do my job. I was called the warden's orderly. So I'd ride over to the admin building and basically clean toilets, clean sinks, vacuuming, those types of things. That would take anywhere from about 45 minutes to an hour and a half, really about what I felt like I wanted to put in for the day. My key goal, though, was to get back in time to work out, because our workout center was part of our cafeteria, and our guy that was in charge of the cafeteria would shut down the workout center when it got close to lunchtime. So I needed to get my workout in. So I always did that, then had lunch. After lunch, I would read and I would work on writing for my blog. As Justin has talked about, I wrote whenever I could. I did book reports. I wrote about my experience. I wrote about just random things that I thought and saw. And I relayed that information to my wife, and she posted it on a blog and shared with our family and friends. So they had an insight to what my day was like. And it also gave her, a little bit of a breather from people constantly asking her how I'm doing, what's going on. She could point to that blog and have people read it. And then I'd go back to work in the afternoon. When I got back from there, I would do my second round of exercise, which was strength training. And then it went on to dinner, Scrabble with a couple of buddies, reading, and then bed. And at bedtime, I would make my oatmeal and coffee for the next day so I could just wake up and add hot water and go. I usually was, as soon as lights out hit, which was 9:30, that was pretty much my time that I would go to sleep. And I'd get up each day right around 5 a.m. But I enjoyed the weekdays more than the weekends, because that's when I had work and that's when I had more structure. Weekends, I felt like dragged a little bit because I was a little bit out of that structure and routine. So you got to kind of make some adjustments there. I also found about halfway through my sentence that I had to kind of make some adjustments. And I found myself kind of gravitating a little bit away from, kind of my white collar friends to a couple of guys that had done time for about 10 years. They had kind of watched me for a couple of months work out and saw that I was consistently working out. And they asked if I wanted to join their afternoon ones. And I told them yes. And I think I about blew them away, because about the last thing in the world they expected was for me, who had pretty much stayed to myself, to say yes to their group workouts. And these two guys are beasts. They are in crazy good shape. They had both been down for about 10 years, but I was in a funk. I was depressed. I was upset. I was really beating myself down. I needed to change. And I found that some of the people that I was talking to, they were just talking about all the negative. And I found that these two guys who were working out a lot and who had been down 10 years, they had a solid routine. They didn't dwell on the negative. They tried to stay positive. And it really kind of picked me up through that time. And it really kind of touched me too, from the fact that they knew I was a short timer. One of them has another 8 or 9 years to go, but they reached out to help me and help me find the positive in the day, help work me out like crazy. They knew I was stressed out and they reached out, and I was very thankful for it. But staying in that routine and finding your routine will be a lifesaver to you.
Well, you mentioned something that's relevant. You mentioned cleaning toilets, for example, and that's not easy. And anyone who's been to prison knows opportunities might be presented to you, like, hey, for a book of stamps, I'll do your job. And there are a number of people who will pay a book of stamps for someone to do their job. So the fact that Ryan didn't do that and did that job shows that, frankly, he's different than a lot of people who feel like that would be beneath them or work their way into another job. And people see that. They can see that he's doing it rather than outsourcing or paying someone to do it. So I really admire you, Ryan, for doing that, given your skill set as an entrepreneur and business person. I know it's nothing you, in a million years, you would never imagine you'd do. Yet you did it with dignity. And I think part of why you had success in prison, the release, what you're having success with now by way of your release plan and the halfway house and getting things approved that people in prison said it will never get approved. I think it's happening by virtue of the work that you did. So I applaud you for doing things that, frankly, are very, very difficult. So thank you I appreciate you contributing.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing. well, actually two more things. One, it did crack me up when I saw Justin's TikTok talking about different things a day in the life, and not having a hot shower. I'm getting used to not having hot showers. Yeah, for the past 30 days, let's say at the halfway house and at camp, hot showers are not prevalent, so be prepared for that.
Yeah.
But the other thing that both Michael and Justin talk about a lot is the risk reward of making a decision and making an educated decision, and also just trying to stay under the radar and doing your time quietly. When I got approached about being the warden's orderly, I really had to think about it, because the decision itself stressed me out, because that's not exactly staying under the radar. I'm going to be going over into the warden's office on a daily basis. I'm going to be interacting with him, the assistant wardens, other people in the admin staff on a regular basis. And all of a sudden, that kind of took my stay under the radar philosophy and throw it out the window. But I knew it also would offer opportunity to become a name with a face and not just a number that shows up on a list. And I think taking that risk with that job and scrubbing those toilets and not complaining did help. It helped get me some extra FSA credits. I think it contributed me getting out of there earlier. So it was definitely a risk worth taking, but it was also one that I contemplated quite a bit.
So thank you. I want everyone to know, Ryan also mentioned a blog in contributing there. The release plan comes in all shapes and sizes. Okay. Can you all see my screen where we have Glenn's website up? Just shake your head if you can. Okay. So this is Glenn Hudson, a member. Can you see it okay, Matt? Everyone see it? Okay. This is Glenn Hudson, a member in our community, serving 4 years at Bastrop in Texas. And yes, he has a release plan, but he also is building his website into his release plan. And he's documenting this extensively. Right? This is Glenn, and every day he's writing. And I can assure you his case manager is reading all of the work that he's doing and what he's doing to build a new record. It's uplifting. It's positive. He's not complaining. He's learning. He's writing book reports. He's sharing this with his eventual probation officer. He owns a gym in Arkansas that his family is managing while he's away. But it's just so different, and it's so unique, and it's just so inspirational. And the benefit of this, of building this into the release plan, of putting this on a website, and this attests to what Ryan mentioned a moment ago, the weekends can feel very long because it lacks the structure of the week. If you're writing and documenting the journey, it forces you to be productive and work, because you want to put compelling content out there. Scott Laney, of course, created a website. He did community service with the nonprofit in advance of his surrender. Part of the reason we think he was approved to work with our team while on home confinement. It's all documented. But Scott, if you could chime in for a moment before we turn over to some questions specifically from Patty. I'm going to come to you next, Patty. Scott, we joke that it's okay to document your journey through a release plan or website, but people are going to get tired if you just write about, what time you got up and how many miles you ran around the track. So documenting things in a release plan, knowing that people were reading it, did it force you to work and help avoid the inevitable boredom?
Sure, 100%. I mean, when you're documenting the journey, when you're writing to family, friends, when you're writing for these various stakeholders, many of whom you won't have the chance to meet, you wake up and you think, okay, Ryan said earlier, the weekends are long, and he's right, they are. But when you have writing, when you have a plan, right, when you go in there with a mission, it can really change the scope of your entire journey. I know it did for me. And what was particularly rewarding was not only using my time wisely, but now that I'm out and I'm on probation, reaping a lot of the benefits of that hard work. Like Justin says, instead of sitting around all day watching the Kardashians, I was up at 6 a.m. writing. I was learning how to play piano, guitar, drums. I read over 70 books and I wrote about all of it. I had busy days, but they weren't just busy to pass the time. They were busy to use the time wisely. And it's helped change the scope of my entire experience through this system.
What Michael frequently says is, we would never ask you to do anything we have not done. And it requires working on days where you think there may be no value or no benefit. So all of you should have read Earning Freedom. If not, we can send you the audiobook at no expense. But in this book, Earning Freedom, Michael, frankly, the First Step Act that was passed in late 2018, Michael had been writing about that for 30 years. He was writing about prisoners earning their way home in 2008. I was alongside him in prison when he hand wrote this 150,000 word book in 6 weeks. It's documented. And there were days I would say to him, how have you done it for so long without knowing there will be any benefit? Like, how does one do that? And he said, I document it, I build, I grow, I'm productive, I'm living with dignity, I'm growing my network, I'm developing skills. I believe all of this work will pay off. In fact, it pays off every day because I'm living deliberately with dignity. And of course, he came home and all the things that people said to him he would never get, he received. Transferring on probation. I think he had lifetime off probation. They took him off after a year, working as a professor. It's all documented. So if he can do it through 26 years by way of his release plan, if you're doing a year, 2, 3, or 4 years, you too can do it. And we've given you a blueprint or template to follow. But again, the onus is on you to do it. It's one thing to watch these videos. It's another thing to say, I'm now going to sit down and spend the next 8 hours working on my release plan. Or if you're doing it with our team, we'll do it collaboratively. But it's one thing to do it or say it. It's another thing to implement it. This is of no use if you just listen and don't act. Patty, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you had some questions. Thank you for that email yesterday. If you're ready to ask away, we're ready to help. Hey, unmute yourself. You have just unmute yourself. That's all.
Yeah, I just want to start by thanking everybody for the content you're creating for people, because it's been invaluable. I've read Scott's blog. I'm sharing it with my husband. I read Ryan's blog just recently. I just rewatched sometimes I'm not always on the webinar live. Sometimes I'm watching it, replays of it. And Matt's story. I'm guessing Matt's kind of in a similar geographic location to us. And my husband does have RDAP written into his PSR. So, potentially there's a chance that he could go to, the camp that Matt went to. Yeah. So it's nice to hear stories, from some of that stuff. I've read other people's stories, but it's a scary place to be. So just to share a little bit, I'm doing a lot of the work with my husband because that's just kind of how we are. We're a team, and he's always working, always doing stuff around the house. Currently he's awaiting sentencing, which got delayed yet again. Your little quick video you did over the weekend about, when the sentencing is delayed, is it a good thing or a bad thing? We both kind of look at each other like, really, again? Like, because, and you've mentioned it before, it almost feels like he's already serving the time. We're just not getting any credit for it. Yeah. But I guess it is a good thing because we're able to get some more projects done on the house and those kinds of things. So just to give a little background before I ask my question, because it kind of ties into that. My husband's indictment happened in September 2019. It was multiple people were involved. I guess he's the ringleader, so his numbers are big. You were talking earlier about proffer. He gone through that series. So the whole reason that everything's gotten delayed is there's a trial that needs to happen for another co-defendant that did not take a deal, and that got pushed, we think, because of the judge's health. And so his sentencing won't happen until after that. At the time his indictment came down, we homeschool our children till they go to high school. So our youngest 2 children at the time were still being homeschooled. We have 5. And we were caring for my ill father who was living with us already for a year at that point. My background, I'm an RN. I stopped working when our youngest was born, who she's now 13. At the time, she was 10. So he was allowed to finish out, the government gave him a month to kind of wind things down with his business. Knowing how my husband is, he's not a person to sit around and do nothing ever. So it's interesting to hear some of these stories. I'm like, it's just not in his nature. So he was brainstorming. His skills range from white collar to blue collar. If you had asked me, he's much more a blue collar guy. So he was brainstorming. Nobody's going to hire him, right? He didn't even attempt to try. Nobody's going to hire him. Why is he going to put himself through that?
Before we get to the question, I want to be careful. We don't want to speak in absolutes. We don't want to say no one will hire him.
I know. No, I know that.
I know of someone who many years ago had more press and publicity than you can imagine, who got 12 years in prison, who found her. So I know it's difficult. And I understand. That's his mindset. We got we got to change that, right? Those are the guys in prison that used to tell Michael, you served 26 years. Your plans in the future are make believe and fairy tale. Now he's doing training in prisons and jails across the country with the right plan. We just don't want to speak in absolutes. And
I understand that, but he's the type of person. So he thought about what skills he had. Our oldest daughter lives in Florida, and he was like, he's always fixing her cars. He's always doing, you know, like,
I understand.
We don't hire you to do anything. So he thought about what skills he could have. And so on our drive to visit her, she needed her car fixed. And so she had to hire a mobile mechanic. I didn't really know they existed, but you could hire somebody to come to her house and they fixed your car in your driveway. So he has those kinds of skills. So he made a decision. We opened 2 businesses. They were open in my name. So the first one, he started doing the work in like January on the car business. And he has limited skills in that. So we opened a second business at a time, which was a pool service business. He went to training for that, a 3-day, got a certification. So we've been doing that. We opened in April of 2000, and the seasons keep going because everything keeps getting delayed. So we have this pool business. So as I'm looking through his release plan and what to do after. So here's two of my questions. One is, we have this pool business that, around here, we're in New Jersey. So it's, we start in, April, we'll start with things. Now we thought we weren't going to get the season. Now we're going to get the season. It's hard finding dedicated employees. We had somebody that was going to be working with us that's not. So my husband's in the process of trying to hire people, hire somebody that can do the technical type of stuff. Because I'm out there working the field with them, sometimes 40, 50 hours a week.
The background is helpful. You mentioned this background ties into the question. Help us understand the pre-sentencing question.
The pre-sentence question is, well, number one is, so his sentencing we're thinking is going to be mid-June. I know Ron, he's on this call. He talked about how, you can kind of say you want this surrender date. I don't know, is it too much to ask for? So my husband really doesn't want to, if we can't find somebody qualified to run the business, he doesn't want to offer customers to service their pool because we might not be able to close it for them, and other companies might not take them on. So is it out of the question to really ask for the sentencing to be, his surrender date to be after the pool season ends? Is that something the judge might laugh at, or?
So this is what I can tell you, and this comes back to the purpose of our webinars of self-advocacy. If you don't ask, you get nowhere. But again, it's not just asking, it's showing. It's like someone in prison asking a case manager for halfway house time. They're like, of course I know you want halfway house time. It's like, a federal judge told me one time, don't ask me for probation. I know you want probation. I know you don't want to go to prison. So you want to be able to show why it's frankly perhaps in the government's interest, or if there are victims in the victim's interest, for you to save up as much as you can if you're making, for example, a restitution payment. So someone in our community is going to plead guilty in July, but he's already given permission that he won't self-surrender to prison until January of next year. There are various reasons that enable the government to honor that request. Some deals closing, those resources are going to get turned over to the victims. It's very clearly laid out with a plan, and this is the business, and there are timelines. But again, it's putting yourself in the shoes of the stakeholders. Why is it in the U.S. attorney's interest or the judge's interest to allow a delay of a self-surrender until this date? If you have evidence behind it, whether it's in the personal narrative, which by now, of course, she should have, and it should have been given to the probation officer, actually inserted into the probation report. So if there's evidence behind it, no guarantee that you'll be successful, but it increases the likelihood that it could happen. So at sentencing, as Ron did, as everyone in this community who's been sentenced to prison will do, the lawyer will ask for a specific prison, not the closest prison to our home. It should be a specific prison. We'll ask for a surrender date and a recommendation for any programs like RDAP, for example. But if the request is January or November, whatever it is, ask and then have a reason behind it. And then what is the judge going to do? They're going to look at, has the person been compliant on pretrial? Have there been any problems? And if the answer is he's been compliant, no violations, no problems, he's at low risk, odds are the judge will be more inclined to grant it. This comes down to the advocacy and the record and everything that you should be building and doing right now. So build it into the release plan, but write it from the perspective of the stakeholders, right? Someone called us a few days ago and they're like, I think they told Scott, like, I'm a phenomenal writer and I'm sure he's a great writer. He could be a better writer than all of us. I don't know. But he attempted to write, and he is a very good writer. But it's not the best adjective or verb. We started to look at what he wrote and it's like, it's all about you, how great you are. You didn't mean to do it. And you inadvertently or on the periphery mention the victims. Right? You throw them in as a throw. I don't care how well you write, this thing should go in the garbage. So if it's the right message and you're putting yourself in the shoes of the people who are going to make these decisions, can't guarantee it will happen, but you advance your interest, your agenda by trying. You want to make sure your lawyer asks and he's got the ammunition behind him. There are some, the judge will say, okay, tell me why. And the lawyer's like, I don't know, it's just why. The lawyer needs to know why you're asking for a specific request. And you want to prepare for those things in advance of sentencing, okay?
Then my next question involves this business too, because you all talk about how like you can't run a business from federal prison. So my question is, if I have somebody doing the technical work in the field, I'm learning to do the computer stuff, all that stuff he's been doing. Would I like? It's not like he can email me, or would he be able to? Would I be able to ask him questions related to the pool business, or no?
I want to be clear. This is a separate conversation, and I can't. We've covered it. We can cover it in the future. But again, I want to be careful about speaking in absolutes. While technically running a business in prison is a 408 disciplinary infraction, the lower level, we've had myriad people build businesses from prison. Including me. Here's, for example, our client Jonathan Chokrian went to prison for a year and a day in a low security prison. MeUndies was just growing. He learned because he understood BOP policy how he could grow what is now $1 billion business. He started growing it from prison with guidance from our team. He knew how to deal with visitation, with email, with snail mail, and how to do it on the phone in a way that didn't violate policy. Okay. So I want to be very careful about speaking in absolutes. Scott Laney on our team documented his journey. He built his whole business by way of his website. There is a policy, BOP policy passed in July of '97 that encourages prisoners to write manuscripts, precluding it does not get in the way of their work detail. A blog, a manuscript can write and build the whole business. Here's Scott's book reports he mentioned. Could Scott in these book reports talk about the business he wants to build? Probably. Here's the prison professor's community service course he did with our team that impacts hundreds of thousands of people in prisons and jail. So I want to be careful about speaking in absolutes. There's policy to follow. Certainly on the phone, you shouldn't say, hey, did that vendor pay us the $8,300? What's happening? So there's a way you learn how to manage it and communicate, but certainly you can contribute to a business from prison. This website has evolved over the years, but here's my blog from prison on a site we don't even manage anymore. But you can go back to my blog when I was in prison alongside Michael Santos, Peculiars of Prison Life, visiting. My whole business was built by way of the blog for the whole world to see. So there are things that he can do to contribute to a business. And I just don't want to speak in absolutes like we can't do this or we can't do that. It requires another conversation, but I want to provide hope that there are ways to do it with staff aware of it. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up? And I want to maybe turn it over to, let's see. Did Hugo join us? Hugo, are you here? I don't know if Hugo's here. He was on. He had to leave. Hugo was someone who had a 36-month sentence. We can call on Hugo next week. Hugo had a 36-month sentence. He was just released from Sheridan after about 9.5 months, which we consider a home run of the century. Okay, those are good things. That's mitigation at work right there. Okay, now last but not least, Andy, are you still there? I want to call on one more person. Andy, if you can unmute yourself. Andy, you have yet to be sentenced, correct?
Correct.
But in advance of your sentencing, you've been documenting your journey. Can you just spend a minute or two on why you're documenting it? And is it providing some value to your life and memorializing this experience? The takeaway before he answers, all of you who are listening, it's not telling these people what you're going to do. It's showing them. It's the content it's creating. If there's one thing you take away from our work, it's don't talk about it, do it, document it. To that end, Andy, could you talk about why you're documenting your journey for a moment or two?
Yeah, so I'm sentenced in just 3 weeks, and I've got my plea deal. I'm an oral surgeon. I was addicted to pain medication, and my plea deal caps my sentencing at 36 months. But the guidelines are more like 4 to 5 years. So I'm very nervous, So I just feel so fortunate that I found you guys, because it's been absolutely bewildering to face this. And this has all just provided a tremendous amount of structure for me during this time that I'm, waiting for all of this to happen. Addiction is a big part of my past. And so I've been very involved in facilitating addiction recovery groups. And I have no experience creating, any online content until now. And I've created a website that has resources for people who are, dealing with recovering from addiction. Also just, I'd say, resources for people like all of us who are dealing with stress and looking at where we're at and wishing we were, a better version of ourselves. So I've put a lot of time into that. And I'm constantly working on my, my allocution. I've had my friends who are writing me letters we've had a lot of back and forth, and, I'm just trying to make everything so that the day that I walk in to face the judge, I'm going to feel like I did everything I could to make it go as well as it could. I volunteer at a food bank here in town, and my release plan, I'm working on that. So yeah, just having the structure that you guys have given me, and that the information I've gained has really helped me make use of my time in a positive way.
Well, as we wrap up, I want to thank you for contributing. And that really comes back to how I've opened the webinar. When that woman said, "What's wrong with you people?" And I empathize with her because her husband's home and they're continuing to struggle, right? It's like, oh my God, you think once you're released from prison, the pain ends. And for many, it's a continuation. And then you look back at the prison term and wonder why. And even people who have resources and never need to work again have great struggle on probation. They can't travel. They're required to look for work or just do things that they didn't think they would have to do because they're home from prison. So when she said, "What's wrong with you people?" Guston said he could work from home. It ain't going to happen unless you document it and do it. So we admire Andy for doing it even before he's sentenced. Whether it's a website, a newsletter, a blog, all built into your release plan, it should be shared with your probation officer, even if the interview is done. Because Chris Maloney, the former chief of probation, told us in an interview, the first thing that your eventual probation officer will do is look at your probation report. And there could be a gap between the probation report and when you meet your probation officer on the other side. And if you haven't built a steady record of what you've done in between, they just won't believe you. And our goal here isn't to try to sell you a website. Get one made on Fiverr or Upwork for $100. Some people work with our team to do it and create it. Do it yourself, as Andy did. Scott did it with us. Andy did it himself. Wherever you do it, create something. Some people work with our team on the release plan. Some do it themselves. Just do it. And if you're able to do it in a message that is consistent with what stakeholders tell us they want to hear, we think, without a guarantee that you will get what you want, but we think you increase your chances for more liberty on probation, higher levels of liberty on the halfway house and home confinement, and a more productive and earlier potential release from federal prison. And by the way, if you do this work leading up to sentencing, it could also help you get a shorter sentence as evidenced by wrong. See how all of it ties together? It's advocacy, and only you can do that. That said, it's 10 after 11 here in Orange County. Are there any questions that I haven't addressed as we wrap up and get ready to enjoy the rest of our day? Anything? I see Miss Johnson talking, but we can't hear you. Just unmute yourself. She's working
Sorry about that.
Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all the information. I've followed you for quite a while. And I just wanted to address what Frank was talking about, because I am a mother who's just as impacted. My son is an Army veteran, and he was incarcerated in Santa Clara County Jail for 3.5 years while awaiting trial. So he was found not guilty, and it was just the whole process of trying to get to him 3,000 miles away. And what people don't understand so much is that even if, we spent like our life savings fighting for his freedom, but what little we could scrape together, we had a hard time finding there in the like Silicon Valley area, like reasonable housing. Mm-hmm. So we would get there also, and sometimes they would be on lockdown. So you lose that airfare money and everything you put into it, and you don't know to stay another week. Like, how can you afford that? So part of helping him to sustain his mental well-being, and he does have PTSD and traumatic brain injury as a result of the incarceration and all this trauma. I did develop PTSD as well, but the way together we made it through was a shared passion, and especially with him being a veteran, a mission was critical. So I started a nonprofit that we renovated an old estate that had been empty for like 10 years and just dilapidated, and redid it, and we housed family members who come into town to visit an incarcerated veteran. And we help those family members understand, what they can expect and how important the visits are. We just make sure that we take at least that element out of, that charge that it costs to stay someplace safe. And veterans, of course, have always they're just more worried about that safety. So we were able to do that. But I said all that to say too, my son from prison jail was involved in like reviewing our bylaws, things like that. And knowing that he, once released, that he would be a board member. He would walk into a business, and that's how we did it. And he was very hands-on, and he developed other businesses since on his own.
Thank you for sharing, and congratulations. Did I hear that he was in custody for 3.5 years and then he was acquitted?
Yeah, he was in custody for 3.5 years, 160 days he spent in solitary confinement. I just put the link to our website. Our stories was in the Washington Post. And just such a unnecessary, tragic story with two judges, even during preliminaries, that there was no intent, there's no malice in his case.
Maybe we can coordinate. I'd love to coordinate an interview on the Prison Professors channel and bring more attention to the work, because my work, we're advocating the prison professors. We're in prisons and jails, creating content. We're inspiring. Okay. We're teaching. Michael is traveling. So I see. Is your contact information on the website here?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll reach out to you. Also, I know you're on our list, if you could email me, I think it would be a great story. Also, we'd love to connect with your son, and congratulations to endure 3.5 years to then be acquitted. It's a remarkable story. So we're happy that he's home.
But and bottom line, not even the nonprofit, is just to give everybody, that's going in, to just keep your eyes on the prize, and that's being back with your family. That is going to happen, and keep yourself busy, and mostly focus on the bigger passion, not even just the work. What is that you feel that you were called to do? And your family members will be happy. I mean, everybody asks, what can I do? And sharing in whatever that passion is gives them something to do. You want to be able to give them something to do when they ask, send me a book or whatever, because they're just helpless, and the helplessness is harming. So that helps us help you.
That actually, there's a video I filming where I read this one of Malcolm X's books in prison, and he said, having power corrupts, but having no power corrupts absolutely. And the idea that if you're helpless and you feel hopeless, it compels people to go nuts and make bad decisions, right? We all want power. So you just kind of mentioned that, the helplessness and hopeless, how so many people feel traversing this system. And that's why there's, for many people, more freedom in prison, because at least you're getting closer to home and you feel like you have clarity, you can have more structure. Like what Andy's doing right now in his beautiful home, he's documented, but it's difficult while you wait to get clarity. There is a helpless feeling, and you want to control as much as you can. So I love that you had said that, and I recently filmed that. I just haven't posted it yet. So thank you for contributing.
Great.
Thank you. Frank, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, we're folks had said that you have a spouse or another family member that's upset. You said, the pain doesn't end after your incarceration. Or even waiting to be incarcerated. And I think that, at least in my experience, the easiest thing to do is to come to a conclusion that it's not all about you, and acknowledge the pain that it causes your family, acknowledge the pain that it causes your spouse, family member, etc., and give them a hug and just let them know that you completely understand how they feel, and that that you feel their pain too, and that acknowledgement goes a long way to keeping things settled down as much as you possibly can at home.
I absolutely agree with that. Thank you, Frank, for all of your contributions, every webinar, including today. You're still with us though, because you're not going until next month, so we're not ready for the webinar. That will be emotional. That will be emotional. User 88, I see your hand.
Hi, Justin.
Hello.
Hi. I have a question. My husband's been in jail for 2 years. He got a no bond warrant initially, and of course, everything we own has been forfeited and seized. So I was left with no resources. But I guess my current question is, my husband just accepted a plea, and he'll be sentenced in June. And so we're kind of getting ready for the sentencing. I already sent him your book, The Prepare.
Yep.
So he's had that for a couple of years now, and he's actually helped other guys in the jail get reduced sentences by talking about your book with them. But I don't think they were federal prisoners.
Mitigation is mitigation, whether it's a DUI, a state or federal case. All have to show why you're worthy of leniency.
Okay, great. But since he can't watch videos, has no access to anything, is there anything else I can be doing?
What I would encourage you to do, and I'll go to our resource page, and Scott, if you could put up a link to this, I would send him Michael's books, right? I would send them Michael's books. I would send him all of them, frankly. I would send him Earning Freedom. I would send him Success After Prison. I would send him the Release Plan Workbook that offers some guidance on how we can begin to create it. Okay. So that's probably what I would do, because all of these require documentation, right? Mm-hmm. This is a great book, Prison, My 8344 Day. It's a 24-hour. I was with Michael when he wrote this. This was a 24-hour day in his life in prison. It's very much the micro day. Earning Freedom is the macro, 26-year journey over 9,500 days. So I would send him these workbooks, and I would encourage him to document it. I think the narrative, of course, is very important. I understand resources are limited, which is why we give away as much content as we possibly can. We also have a very modestly priced sentencing narrative course that offers advice and guidance. But either way, these resources will help, and he's doing well. We just want him to continue to document it in advance of his sentencing hearing. And I know he's been in jail for 2 years, but at least he's going to get credit for that time served. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for contributing to our webinars. Do I see any other hands here?
Yeah.
That's it. That's it.
As it put it on there, anyone that can help with the new book, Roadmap to Buettner, would be greatly appreciated.
Well, I mentioned you, Frank. I'm going to connect you with Learned, who's certified. So you'll connect with him. So given that, we'll be back next Thursday. And if any of you have suggestions or ideas on what you'd like us to cover, we'd like to cover it. We've done webinars where we're talking, bringing other people into the community, sharing their stories. Some are more structured, where it's First Step Act, disciplinary infractions. So we want to do what's best for you. So don't hesitate to send an email or leave a message about content you think we should cover. And I'm glad we got into subjects today like RDAP, the differences between the RDAP camp and the general compound, whatnot. So feel free to reach out to us. And with that said, we're all, Mark, I see your hand up. Is that before? I was about to do my
no, yeah, just
to do the wrap off and blow you all off for the day.
I just want to say, because you asked for content, and
oh boy, yeah,
we talked about it before, but the restitution and forfeiture being combined conversation that Mike, I don't see Mike on here today, but he was talking about that a couple of times.
Yes, so that's a good idea. Michael has mentioned that he'd be happy to do that. So that's something that I will coordinate in one of our next 2 or 3 webinars. We'll go through that. We'll go through criminal restitution, forfeiture, FRP payments in prison, and how the FLU, Financial Litigation Unit, tracks and collects after you're released from prison. So thank you for reminding me.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay. Ron's now back in the car driving home, making it happen. All right, everyone. Thank you all very much for contributing. We look forward to seeing you next Thursday at the same time. And every resource we mentioned in this blog, presuming I get permission from everyone, I will send all out in the next day or 2. Okay. So I look forward to seeing you all next Thursday. Thank you again.
Thanks a million.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.